This isn't some dramatic story I made up for clicks. It's the honest, painful truth of what happened in my family. Sometimes the people you're supposed to trust the most are the ones who will drive the knife in the deepest. The first hint of the war to come was the weight of a small brass key in the palm of my hand. I was sitting in a sterile, mahogany-lined conference room at the law offices of Dalton Finch and Associates in downtown Boston. The air thick with the smell of old paper and the kind of grief that feels more like a business transaction. Across the table, my brother Julian, the golden child, the victor, held up a single sheet of paper, what he claimed was our mother's final will, and declared my entire world a lie. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The funeral had been 3 days earlier, a blur of black dresses, hushed condolences, and the suffocating scent of lilies. Mom's passing was sudden, a swift and merciless aneurysm that had stolen her from us without a chance to say goodbye. Julian had handled everything, of course. He was the one who made the calls, arranged the service, and accepted the sympathy with a practiced, somber grace. I was the one who felt like I'd been hollowed out with a spoon, drifting through the proceedings in a fog of disbelief. I was the quiet one, the librarian, the daughter who had stayed close to home, who had coffee with Mom every Saturday morning and helped her in the garden on Sundays. Julian was the high-flying real estate broker with a corner office, a flashy German car, and a Rolodex of important contacts. He flew in for holidays, charmed everyone for 48 hours, and then flew back to his own orbit. Yet somehow, he was always seen as the responsible one, the one who had his life together. Now, in that suffocatingly quiet room, the family lawyer, a man named Mr. Abernathy, who looked like his smile had been professionally starched, cleared his throat. "As you know," he began, his voice a dry rustle, "your mother, Eleanor Vance, appointed Julian as the executor of her estate. He has presented us with what we believe to be her last will and testament, dated May 12, 2018. That was over 5 years ago. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Mom had a health scare in 2022, a minor heart issue that had scared her straight. She'd spent the entire summer afterward getting her affairs in order, telling me on more than one occasion, "I want to make sure things are fair, Clara. Truly fair. No surprises." Julian slid the document across the polished table. His face was a perfect mask of sorrow, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, held a glint of triumph. "It's pretty straightforward," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Mom left the house, and the majority of the estate to me. It makes sense of course, I have a family to think about. Business expenses? She knew I could manage the assets best." He gestured to the paper as if it were a minor inconvenience. "She made a small provision for you, Clara. A trust of $50,000 to be paid out over 10 years, $50,000. Our mother's home in Brookline alone was worth over $2 million. Her investment portfolio was substantial. This wasn't a provision, it was an insult. It was a dismissal." I stared at him, my throat too tight to speak. He had to be joking. This was some kind of cruel, grief-induced prank. But his expression was unyielding. "She also wrote," he added, turning a page and pointing a manicured finger at a specific clause, "that she knew you were financially secure in your career and that you didn't have the same burdens I do." He looked at me then, his head tilted in a performance of sympathy that made my skin crawl. "I know it's not what you expected, but she was thinking of what was practical." Mr. Abernathy, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, chimed in, "It is all legally sound, properly signed and witnessed." My mind was reeling. Financially secure? I was a senior librarian at the Boston Public Library. I loved my job, but it wasn't lucrative. I lived in a small apartment in Jamaica Plain, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and budgeted carefully. Julian, meanwhile, had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal on a seaport condo development and took annual ski trips to Aspen. The logic was so twisted, so profoundly backward, that it could only have been crafted by him. Mom would never have said that. She would never have done this. We had been so close, especially in those last few years. She knew I was struggling to save for a down payment on a small place of my own. She knew my dreams, my fears. This document, this lie, erased all of it. It painted me as a distant, self-sufficient entity, a footnote in her life, while anointing Julian the rightful heir to her legacy. I finally found my voice, a weak, trembling thing. "No," I whispered. "That's not right. She told me she updated everything last year. She said it was fair." Julian sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of paternal patience. "Clara, grief does strange things. People misremember. This is what she wanted. It's here in black and white." He tapped the paper again, a gesture of finality. He was stonewalling me, using my grief as a weapon to paint me as confused and irrational. And Mr. Abernathy, a man who had known our family for decades, simply nodded along, his job to execute the paper in front of him, not to question its soul. The meeting concluded in a haze. Julian was handed a thick packet of documents. I was handed a brochure for the trust company that would dribble out my pittance over the next decade. As we stood to leave, Julian placed a condescending hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, sis. I'll take care of everything. You just focus on, well, you." The rage that flashed through me was so hot it felt like a fever. He wasn't just taking my inheritance, he was taking my relationship with my mother, twisting it into something ugly and unrecognizable. He was erasing me. I pulled away from his touch and walked out of that office without another word, my mind a storm of confusion and betrayal. The one thought that kept repeating, a desperate mantra, was my mother's voice from a rainy afternoon the previous summer. "If anything ever happens, Clara, if anyone ever tries to tell you something that doesn't feel right, you remember the little box? It's my insurance policy for fairness." I had no idea what it meant then, but as I stood on the bustling Boston street, the city blurring around me, I knew that finding that box was the only thing that mattered now. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Julian, now the official executor, moved with brutal efficiency. He emailed me a sterile, bullet-pointed list of his action items, which included an immediate appraisal of the house for sale, liquidation of Mom's stock portfolio, and a request for me to come retrieve any items of sentimental value from the house before he had an estate sale company come through to clear it out. He was giving me a 48-hour window. It was a power play, a clear message that my time in our family home, the home I grew up in, was now on a clock controlled by him. Walking through the front door of that Brookline Colonial felt like stepping into a museum of my own life. Every corner held a ghost. The scuff mark on the baseboard in the hall where I'd crashed my tricycle. The faint pencil lines on the kitchen door frame marking my and Julian's heights through the years, his always shooting up faster than mine. The worn spot on the floral armchair where Mom sat every evening, reading under her favorite lamp. Julian was there, of course, directing two burly men from an estate clean-out service. He was pointing at furniture, making decisions with a cold, detached air. "This all goes," he'd say. "Toss the magazines, box up the china, we'll see if it's worth anything." He greeted me, not with a hug, but with a clipboard. "Clara, good, you're here. Make a list of what you're taking. I need it for the inventory. And try to be quick. These guys are on the clock." He was treating me like a stranger, a looter, picking over the remains. I ignored him and walked past the chaos into Mom's study. It was her sanctuary, A small, sun-filled room lined with bookshelves and smelling faintly of her favorite Earl Grey tea. It was meticulously organized. Mom was a creature of habit and order. Bills in one folder, letters in another, every book alphabetized by author. If there was a clue to be found, it would be here. Julian's voice boomed from the hallway. "Don't bother with the desk. I already went through it with Abernathy. All the important documents are with me now." That was it. That was the spark. He didn't want me in here, which meant this was exactly where I needed to be. I waited until he was occupied, arguing with one of the movers about a scratch on a mahogany sideboard before I shut the study door. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was looking for. A key? A letter? A bank statement? I started with her desk, just as he'd told me not to. It was neat, but it felt disturbed. The pens weren't in their usual holder. A stack of stationery was slightly askew. He had been through here, rifling for anything of value. I pulled out the drawers, one by one. Old checkbook registers, warranties for appliances, birthday cards from years past. Nothing. I ran my hands along the spines of her books, a lifetime of reading. Jane Austen, Virginia Woolf, modern poetry. Then I saw it, a thick leather-bound volume on the history of Boston's North End. It was out of place. Mom's history books were all on the bottom shelf, organized by period. This one was tucked between a collection of Robert Frost poetry and a gardening almanac. My breath caught. The North End. Mom had grown up there, in a small apartment above a bakery. She had stories of playing in the narrow streets and the smell of garlic and fresh bread that always hung in the air. I pulled the heavy book from the shelf. It felt strangely stiff. I fanned the pages, and something small and flat fell out, landing silently on the Persian rug. It was an old photograph, faded at the edges. It was of Mom and me, probably when I was 6 or 7, sitting on a bench in the Boston Public Garden, squinting in the sun as we shared a bag of popcorn. It was one of my favorite memories. I turned it over. On the back, in her elegant looping cursive, was a single sentence. My 2 treasures, my daughter and my first secret. My first secret. I looked back at the book in my hands. Her first job, she'd told me once, was as a teller's assistant at a small community bank in the North End, a place called the Mariners Trust. It was where she'd opened her very first savings account, her secret nest egg, as a teenager. The bank had been bought out by a larger institution decades ago, absorbed and forgotten. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This had to be connected. I slipped the photo into my pocket and put the book back, making sure it was exactly as I'd found it. My search became more frantic, more focused. I moved from the books to her old jewelry armoire. Tangles of necklaces, her mother's pearls, a collection of brooches. In the very back of the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a velvet lining that had started to peel away with age, my fingers brushed against something hard and cold. I pulled it out. It was a key. Not a house key, but a small, ornate brass key, the kind I'd only ever seen in old movies. It was attached to a simple metal tag, stamped with a number, 317. There was no bank name, no other identifying mark. Just that number, 317. I stared at it, the metal cool against my skin. This was it. This had to be the key to the little box. The insurance policy. I closed my fist around it, the sharp edges digging into my palm. It was more than a key. It was a weapon, and I had just found it in the heart of my enemy's territory. Julian called my name from the hall, his voice laced with impatience. "Clara, are you done in there? We need to get this room cleared." I quickly composed myself, slipped the key into my jeans pocket alongside the photograph, and walked out of the study, my face a mask of quiet grief. I couldn't let him see the hope, the fire that had just been lit inside me. I had the key. Now all I had to do was find the lock. Finding the lock was like searching for a single grain of sand on a Revere beach. I spent the next 2 weeks in a frantic, clandestine race against time. Julian was moving ahead with the probate process for the 2018 will, a legal maneuver that would solidify his control over every last cent of Mom's estate. Every day that passed was another day he could drain accounts and sell assets, making it harder for me to ever claw anything back. He had already put the house on the market. The for sale sign from his own real estate agency, a garish, triumphant stake driven into the front lawn. It was a daily public humiliation. My first calls were to the big banks, Bank of America, Citizens, Santander. I sat in my small apartment with a phone to my ear and a list, describing the key, the box number, and my mother's name. The response was always the same, polite but firm dismissal. Without an account number or a branch location, we can't help you, ma'am. Safe deposit box records are confidential. You would need the executor of the estate to make that inquiry. Every conversation was a dead end that left me feeling more helpless, more foolish. Was I chasing a ghost? Was this key just some forgotten relic from a long-closed account, holding nothing more than old sentimental trinkets? Julian, meanwhile, was relishing his new role as the wealthy patriarch. He traded in his already expensive car for a newer, more ostentatious model. He took his family on a last-minute trip to the Caribbean, posting pictures on social media of them on a yacht, champagne flutes in hand. The caption read, "Honoring Mom's memory by living life to the fullest. She always wanted us to enjoy the fruits of her labor." I saw the post and felt a rage so pure it made me dizzy. He was using her money, our money, to fund a lifestyle of shameless excess while I was counting pennies and fighting a silent war he didn't even know had begun. He was so confident, so arrogant, that he couldn't imagine me, quiet Clara, ever challenging him. He had poisoned the well with our extended family, too. I got a call from our Aunt Carol, her voice dripping with disappointed sympathy. "Clara, dear," she began, "Julian told me you were having a hard time accepting your mother's wishes. I know you two were close, but fighting the will, it's just not a good look. It seems so grasping." I tried to explain that I believed the will was fraudulent, that Mom had told me differently, but my words sounded weak and desperate, even to my own ears. Julian had framed the narrative. He was the responsible son, burdened with a greedy, delusional sister. The isolation was crushing. He hadn't just stolen my inheritance, he was methodically stealing my credibility, my family, my past. My breakthrough came from the clue I'd found first, the book about the North End, Mariner's Trust, the long-forgotten bank where Mom had her first job. I spent a whole day at the Boston Public Library, my own turf, digging through microfiche archives of old newspapers and business directories. It took hours, but I finally found it. A 1982 article announcing the acquisition of Mariner's Trust by a larger regional bank, which was then acquired by an even larger national bank in the late 90s. I had a name. I walked into the grand marble-floored downtown branch of the successor bank, a place that felt more like a cathedral than a financial institution. I was passed from a young teller to a branch manager and finally to a woman in the wealth management department, a stern-looking vice president named Ms. Albright. I told her my story, leaving out the part about my brother's betrayal, and focused on trying to locate a piece of my mother's history. I showed her the key. I showed her the faded photograph. I told her about Mariner's Trust. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she was going to give me the same brush-off. Instead, she picked up her phone and made a call to their central records department. She spoke in a low, authoritative voice, rattling off codes and acronyms. After a few minutes, she hung up and looked at me. "We found it," she said, her tone softening slightly. "The original charter from Mariner's Trust is still active in our system, Box 317 is at our North End branch. It's been paid up continuously for over 50 years. Relief washed over me so intensely, my knees felt weak. I had found it. It was real. I need to open it, I said, my voice shaking. Ms. Albright's professional demeanor snapped back into place. I'm afraid it's not that simple. The box is registered to Eleanor Vance. Only she or the legally appointed executor of her estate can access it. You'll need to bring Mr. Julian Vance with you. My heart sank into my stomach. It was the one thing I couldn't do. Asking Julian to come with me would be tipping my hand. He would find a way to stop me, to empty the box himself, to destroy whatever was inside. It was a catch-22. I had found the lock, but the man who held the only other key was my sworn enemy. He had all the power, all the legal authority. I had a tarnished brass key and a desperate hope. And it wasn't enough. I walked out of that bank and into the cold Boston air, feeling utterly defeated. Julian was going to win. He had built an impenetrable fortress of lies and legal documents around my mother's legacy, and I was standing outside the walls with no way in. I was at my lowest point when Julian made his final, most arrogant mistake. A few days after my dead end at the bank, a sleek black courier motorcycle pulled up outside my apartment building. The rider handed me a thick envelope with the logo of Julian's lawyer's firm on it. Inside was a coldly formal letter. It was a notice of eviction. Not from my apartment, but from the family home. The letter stated that as the property was now under contract to be sold, I had 10 days to remove the few boxes of personal belongings I had stored in the attic. 10 days. He wasn't just selling our childhood home. He was purging the last remnants of my existence from it with the callousness of a landlord evicting a deadbeat tenant. But it was the postscript, a handwritten note from Julian at the bottom of the page, that finally broke me. It read, Clara, I know this is hard, but it's time to move on. Let me know if you need the number for a good storage unit. Best, J. The casual cruelty of it, the feigned concern, was breathtaking. He was throwing me out of my own past and offering me the number for a storage unit as a consolation prize. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my dark living room, the eviction notice on the coffee table, and I felt something inside me shift. The grief that had clouded my judgment for weeks finally receded, replaced by a glacier of pure, cold rage. The tears stopped. The helplessness vanished. I was done being the victim. I was done being quiet, sad little Clara. He thought he had already won. He thought I was beaten. He had no idea I was even in the fight. That eviction notice was the turning point. It was the catalyst that transformed my grief into a weapon. The next morning I didn't wallow. I got to work. I knew I couldn't fight Julian's army of high-priced lawyers on my own. I needed a shark. I spent 2 days researching Boston's most tenacious probate litigators, lawyers who specialized in contested wills and estate fraud. I found her on the 3rd page of a Google search. Anya Sharma. Her website was no frills. Her photos showed a woman in her late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Her bio was short and to the point, for complex estate disputes and fiduciary misconduct. We fight for what's right. I called her office and got an appointment for the next day. I walked into her small, unpretentious office near the Suffolk County Courthouse and laid everything out on her desk. The 2018 will Julian had produced, the eviction notice, the photograph of me and my mom, and the brass key. I told her the entire story, my voice low and steady, no tears, no hysterics, just the cold, hard facts. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her legal pad. She looked from the key to my face. He's arrogant, she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. He liquidated assets before the probate was even settled and put the house on the market immediately. He's acting like the money is already his, which means he's either stupid or incredibly confident that no one will ever challenge him. He thinks I'm weak, I replied. He's always thought that. Anya smiled, a thin, sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good. Let him. We'll use that. Her strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. We couldn't prove the will was a fake without seeing the real one, and we couldn't get to the real one without raising Julian's suspicions. So, we wouldn't attack the will directly, we would attack him. Anya drafted a petition to the probate court. It wasn't a challenge to the will itself. It was an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order to halt the sale of the house and freeze all estate accounts. The grounds? Julian's blatant and reckless behavior as executor. We cited the immediate liquidation of stocks in a volatile market, the sale of the primary residence before a full inventory of assets had been completed, and his use of estate funds for personal travel. I gave Anya the screenshots from his Caribbean vacation. The centerpiece of our argument was the safe deposit box. Anya framed it perfectly. We weren't claiming to know what was inside. We were arguing that as a prudent executor, Julian had a fiduciary duty to inventory all of his mother's known property, and his failure to even investigate a known safe deposit box was a dereliction of that duty. We were asking the judge to compel him to do his job. The motion was designed to look like a desperate, procedural roadblock thrown up by a disgruntled heir. It was a Trojan horse. The day of the hearing was terrifying. We were in a small courtroom in the Suffolk County Probate and Family Court, a grand, intimidating old building. Julian was there with Mr. Abernathy and a second, much more aggressive-looking lawyer. Julian wouldn't even look at me. He sat there, tan and smug in his $1,000 suit, whispering to his legal team. His lawyer argued that our motion was frivolous, a vindictive fishing expedition designed to harass his client and delay the inevitable. He painted me as an emotional, grasping daughter who couldn't accept her mother's final wishes. Then Anya stood up. She was calm, precise, and utterly ruthless. She presented the evidence piece by piece, the real estate listing for the house which went live just 5 days after the funeral, the brokerage statements showing the liquidated stocks, the social media photos of the yacht. With every exhibit, I saw Julian's smug expression tighten. When Anya brought up the safe deposit box, Julian's lawyer scoffed. "Your Honor, my client has no knowledge of any such box. This is a fantasy." "Then he won't object?" Anya shot back to a court order allowing the box to be opened in the presence of both parties so it can be properly inventoried. If it's empty or contains only sentimental items, then Ms. Vance will drop her objections to the sale of the home. It was a masterful checkmate. If Julian refused, he'd look like he was hiding something. If he agreed, he'd be walking into our trap. The judge, a weary-looking woman who had clearly seen every flavor of family drama, looked at Julian. "Mr. Vance, do you have any objection to inventorying a potential asset of your mother's estate?" Julian was cornered. He exchanged a panicked look with his lawyer before plastering a fake smile on his face. "Of course not, Your Honor. I have nothing to hide. I'm happy to accommodate my sister's curiosity." The judge banged her gavel. "Motion granted. The box will be opened 1 week from today, both parties and their counsel to be present. The sale of the property is hereby stayed, and all estate accounts are frozen pending the outcome of the inventory." I walked out of the courtroom with Anya, my hands shaking. Julian stormed past us in the hallway, his face a mask of thunder. He was furious, but he still didn't understand. He thought he had just been inconvenienced. He had no idea he had just agreed to attend his own execution. The week leading up to the bank appointment was the longest of my life. The court order felt like a ticking bomb. Julian was legally compelled to appear, but I couldn't shake the fear that he would find some way to sabotage us, to get to the box first, to make it all disappear. Anya assured me that the bank had been served with the court order, and the box was effectively under lockdown. But my anxiety was a constant, humming presence. On the appointed day, we all converged at the North End branch of the bank. It was a smaller, older building than the downtown headquarters, with faded nautical paintings on the walls, a relic of the Mariners' Trust it had once been. The air was thick with tension. It was me and Anya on one side of the stuffy waiting area, and Julian, Mr. Abernathy, and his bulldog litigator on the other. Julian was dressed impeccably, but I could see a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. For the first time, he looked rattled. The bravado was gone, replaced by a sullen, simmering anger. A bank manager, a nervous man named Mr. Rossi, led us down a flight of stairs and into the vault. The air grew cool and dry. The silence was broken only by the loud mechanical clank of the massive circular vault door swinging open. We were led into a small private viewing room adjacent to the main vault wall, which was honeycombed with gleaming metal doors of all sizes. Mr. Rossi, holding my key and the bank's master key, located box 317. It was smaller than I had imagined, a slim, unassuming rectangle of steel. He inserted both keys, turned them in sequence, and the lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. He pulled out the long metal box and placed it on the table in front of us. "As per the court order," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "the box will now be opened and its contents inventoried." Julian leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, trying to project an air of bored authority. Anya placed a calming hand on my arm. My own heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. What if it was nothing? What if, after all this, it was just old letters and costume jewelry? My entire future, my mother's truth, was resting inside that cold metal box. Mr. Rossi lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were several bundles of letters tied with ribbon, a few pieces of antique jewelry, and my father's old military dog tags. My breath hitched. Julian let out a small, relieved sigh, a smirk beginning to play on his lips. This was exactly what he had hoped for. Sentimental junk. His lawyer began to speak. "Well, it seems this has all been a colossal waste of everyone's time." "Wait," Anya said, her voice sharp and clear. She pointed to the bottom of the box. Lying beneath the letters was a large navy blue portfolio, the kind lawyers use for official documents. It was sealed with a wax stamp bearing the insignia of a prestigious estate planning firm I didn't recognize. My mother's handwriting was on the front, clear and strong. "Last will and testament of Eleanor Vance, to be opened upon my death. This document revokes all prior wills and codicils." Julian's face went completely white. It was the color of chalk, all the blood draining from it in an instant. He stared at the blue portfolio as if it were a venomous snake. Anya, following the strict protocol of the court order, put on a pair of white gloves and carefully lifted the portfolio from the box. She broke the seal and slid out a thick, professionally bound document. She handed it to me. My hands were shaking as I took it. I looked across the table, directly into my brother's terrified eyes, and I read the first sentence aloud, my voice ringing with a clarity and strength I didn't know I possessed. "I, Eleanor Vance, of Brookline, Massachusetts, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all wills and codicils heretofore made by me." The aftermath in that small, airless vault room was pure chaos. Julian erupted. "It's a fake!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "She's forged it! This is a joke!" His lawyer tried to silence him, but the panic had set in. He was flailing, cornered, and lashing out. Mr. Abernathy, his face pale with the sudden dawning horror of his own professional negligence, just stared at the document in my hands. Anya was the calm center of the storm. "It's no fake, Julian," she said, her tone as cold and sharp as ice. "This will is dated August 4th, 2022, It is signed by your mother and witnessed by 2 partners at the firm of Crestwood and Payne, a highly respected estate planning group. I took the liberty of contacting them yesterday. They have a signed copy in their files and are prepared to testify to its authenticity." She let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the killing blow. "They also confirmed that your mother explicitly told them she was creating this new will because she was concerned you would attempt to manipulate her estate after her death." That was it. The final, undeniable proof of his premeditation. It wasn't just a battle over money anymore. It was a matter of character, of intent, of fraud. Julian sputtered, trying to form a defense, but no words came out. His entire world, built on a foundation of lies and entitlement, had just been demolished by a single, perfectly preserved document. The bank manager, Mr. Rossi, looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. He formally recorded the discovery of the new will, and the meeting was adjourned. We walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sun, and it felt like I was breathing for the first time in weeks. Julian and his legal team scurried away, speaking in frantic, hushed tones. They knew they weren't just going to lose the estate. They were facing a legal firestorm. Back in Anya's office, we mapped out the final phase of the war. We didn't just want the will validated, we wanted justice. Anya filed a barrage of motions. The first was to have the 2022 will immediately accepted into probate and the 2018 will declared fraudulent. The second was to have Julian immediately removed as executor on the grounds of gross misconduct, fraud, and perjury. The third, and most satisfying, was a motion to compel a full forensic accounting of every dollar he had spent from the estate accounts since the day of Mom's death. Every dinner, every plane ticket, every drop of gas in his new car. And the final piece, the one Anya called the nail in the coffin, was a formal referral of the case to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, recommending criminal charges for forgery and perjury. "He won't go to prison," Anya explained. "First time, white-collar crime, he'll get a deal, but he'll have a criminal record. He'll lose his real estate license. He'll be ruined, professionally, financially, and publicly." The climax came not in a courtroom, but at a forced settlement conference. Julian, stripped of all his bluster, sat across the table from me. He was a ghost of the man who had patronized me in this same building weeks earlier. He was thin, pale, and his expensive suit hung on him like a shroud. His lawyers had advised him that his position was indefensible. The evidence was absolute. He had 2 choices: face a public trial, criminal charges, and complete annihilation, or agree to our terms. Our terms were brutal. He would renounce any claim to the estate beyond a token amount of $1, as specified in the real will's disinheritance clause for any heir who challenged it. He would immediately repay every single cent he had misappropriated with interest, which would require him to sell his fancy car and liquidate his own assets. He would sign a public apology to me and to the family for his fraudulent actions. He had no choice. He signed the papers, his hand trembling. He didn't look at me once. He had flown too close to the sun on wings of arrogance, and now he had crashed back to earth, a broken, humiliated man. I had not only won back my inheritance, I had dismantled his entire life with the one thing he never thought I possessed: the truth. Months have passed since that day. The legal battles are over. Julian, as predicted, took a plea deal that spared him jail time but cost him his career and his reputation. He and his family moved out of state, shrouded in a cloud of shame. I never got an apology, not a real one anyway, just the legally mandated statement his lawyer drafted. I chose not to sell the house. I live there now, in the quiet, sun-filled rooms that hold so many of my mother's memories. The financial security is a relief, but it's not a victory. There are nights when I sit in her favorite armchair, the house silent around me, And I think about everything that happened. I won. I got justice for my mother and reclaimed what was rightfully mine. But the cost was a brother, a family, a past that I can never look at the same way again. I found my mother's will, but in the process, I unearthed an ugliness that will never truly be buried. He stole a document, so I took his future. And now, all that remains between us is the deafening silence of what used to be a family. The end.